good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. Is anyone here in a good evening, in a night mood? No? Yeah, Veronica, you are in a night mood? Yes? What time
I
is
am.
there?
It's 5
I
p.m.
know, it's like Portugal, almost like Portugal. Right, so I'm delighted to present this UNICON webinar, What Women Want, really what we want. Here are some few things to keep in mind, please. We are recording this webinar, and when it's over, you will be able to access the link of the recording and also the executive summary of these reports. This webinar will start with a networking session, but after the Andrew Crispy session, and followed by a Q&A. During the webinar, you can put your questions in at the chat. And at the end, my colleague Shalini, that she is the chairman of UNICON board, she will help us to moderate our debate. So like other UNICON events, we have the antitrust competition statement. So please be aware on that. So this report says that much has been achieved to promote gender equity within organization, but yet clearly more is need to be done. So we are not there yet. The What Women Want 2025 report highlights this gap. And many organizations says that they are doing enough, but women still report that there are few barriers to their career development. So we are trying to discuss the big question here, is that in this context, the executive education can be one of the most practical ways to accelerate women development of skills, confidence, and leadership readiness. So what we would love to invite you to do, we are going to create some small breakout rooms, and please try to present yourself and then answer the question if we in executive education could do something to accelerate this skills development and leadership readiness of women. Let's do it, Danielle.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Marta. And then Andrew should hopefully join us and share some of the insights from the research as well. But it's also a good opportunity for you to network with each other. So I'll open the breakouts, and if that's okay, hopefully that works. Okay, everyone's back now, Marta.
Yes, everyone is coming in. Great. So the faces are lovely. So maybe you have amazing discussing. Let's do the whole crowd, please, Danielle.
Of course. So what we would like to do, just before we hand over to Andrew, who made it, which is great. So if you just jump into slido.com very quickly, just so we can capture to see if there were some common points that you discussed. And it will ask you for a code, and the code is UNICON. And we just like to know, what did you discuss related to what do women want, how executive education can support them. Maybe you had some interesting conversations, and hopefully that should inform your presentation as well, Andrew.
Thank you.
No worries. And hopefully you can get to this poll. I don't see anyone typing yet, but so slido.com, you could go on your phone or just on your computer, and the code is UNICON. Let me make sure. Yeah, 2 participants.
Oh, yes,
okay, great.
yes.
That's working.
Hi, Natalie. Nice to see you here. Brian.
Good to see you.
Okay. Oh, look. Women, families, well, work-life balance, I guess.
Oh, balance, yes. That's
launched women programs to accelerate careers. Okay. Lots around the support and balance, right? And I think, Andrew, you probably mentioned a lot of that in your study as well. So, a safe place to learn, opportunity to juggle life, work, family.
So, Andrew, do you like to jump in?
Well, I think, as Danielle just said, many of these things are very familiar from the research we've done. Family in particular.
All right, Andrew, stop sharing and hand it over to you.
Okay, and I will try and share my slides. Here we go.
So okay, that's right.
Can you see that?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, let me get a full screen. There we go. Well, my apologies for my tardiness. The traffic in West London or west of London is just appalling this afternoon. But I'm delighted to join you now to talk about this important study that we completed last year. I'll dive straight in. I've got about 30 slides, but I'm not planning to spend forever talking about them. I'd much rather hear your questions and get involved in some valuable discussion, but there'll be plenty of opportunity for that as I progress through. So let me move a little bit of context first of all. I'm always slightly suspicious of some of the data from the World Economic Forum because the numbers seem to be just so large. But given they are so large, they are probably a fair indicator of what we're looking at in terms of opportunity. And it is opportunity, but it's also challenge. If 1 billion people need new skills by 2030, my guess is that of that billion, more of them are women than men because of where we've been in the past. The question is, are business schools and universities to an extent ready to meet this demand? And what do we actually mean by skills? Is skills what executive education has been about? Is it what it should be about? Or is it about more broad-based leadership development with skills embedded in it? And I think that's one of the messages that came out through the study and in other studies that we've done recently, that whilst I may be studying for one particular subject, I actually am interested in, and it's a terrible word to use, but pimping my studies. And what we mean by that is personalizing them, adding in elements, particularly skills, particularly today related to AI, that are going to be helpful and valuable. I said I've got 2 or 3 context slides. This is the second one. Where are the opportunities? What are the hard skills? What are the, and I'm going to use the word human skills rather than soft skills, that are going to be in high demand? I think what we're talking about is 4 distinct types of opportunities. I heard a very good presentation in Singapore a year ago, which focused on the first 3 of these: high tech, high trust, high touch. I've added a 4th, high turmoil. The uncertainty that we live with today is enormous. The decisions that are coming out of the US government on occasions change within the day, and managing that and just dealing with that. And one of the things that's missing from this list, which I suspect is becoming increasingly important, probably most people had even forgotten about, is trade policy. What are you going to do to put your business in a position that it can deal with the ups and downs of trade policy as it exists or doesn't even exist today? But interestingly, on the left-hand side, what's really interesting about this, this is data from LinkedIn looking at demand for skills, hard skills to a certain extent. And whilst AI literacy is at the top, you've also got adaptability, you've got innovative thinking, you've got public speaking, you've got a whole range of things which are much more connected with some of those things on the right-hand side, the human skills, critical thinking, absolutely a bedrock of higher education, leadership, a key component of executive education. But also these things: empathy, social influence, and not just critical thinking, but creative thinking as well. So are we as business schools positioned to deliver this in our programs? And the third piece of context is this slide, which is from a presentation we made to an institution recently. Historically, we may have thought of the circle on the left-hand side, universities and business schools, as being where most of the competition was. The reality today is all of this and probably more. And it's not just the private online providers who've grown enormously in the last 5-10 years. It is the consulting firms increasingly. And in, consulting firms in there, Korn Ferry, are Korn Ferry a consulting firm? I don't know, but increasingly in their search and selection business, which is what they're known for, they're also considering whether people have the right skills and supporting organizations to make sure the people they're putting in place do have the right skills such that they can thrive once they're in their new settings. So competition in this marketplace has grown enormously just in the last 5 years and is a really important consideration. Let me turn to the study itself, though. I think the first message is an incredibly positive one. As you can see here, 8 out of 10 women and employers say they believe executive education is a powerful tool for women's career growth. And it would be lovely to walk away at that point and say, that's that, all clear, we can go forward. But then you begin to see some questions arise. On the right-hand side, 52%, the status of women's leadership in their sector is acceptable and requires no further action. Now, if that's the case, that would be wonderful as well, but it's not the case. We know it's not the case. And so there's this little bit of a disconnect already creeping in. And that is a theme that occurs throughout the research findings from individual women and the views of employers. And I'll say a little bit more about that as we go through. I've just pressed the wrong button. There we go. However, again, positive news. The return on investment, as it says, clearly demonstrated. Confidence, involvement in significant projects, salary increases. 79% of employers say executive education increasing women's leadership readiness. There's no doubt that when individual women, when employers send women on programs, they see the benefits. The question is, who is seeing those benefits? The individual women, fantastic. But within organizations, if it's just the L&D director, if it's just the person looking at talent in the organization, who rarely have a place on the C-suite executive table, if that message isn't getting through at senior levels in organizations, then we're missing out. So there's a communication gap as well as a disconnect. You can see as well, if you look at this is women who've completed or are currently undertaking executive education. The numbers where it's exceeded or at least met expectations, we're talking close to half. The number where it did not meet expectations, typically a quarter or less. So again, the evidence suggests that it's really making a difference in terms of the objectives that organizations and individuals have in undertaking programs in the first place. So again, it's a very positive message by and large. So I wanted to highlight today 6 key findings, and I'll take you through those individually in just a moment. So just for way of background, those who aren't aware, the survey looked at the experience of 5,000 individual women learners. It looked at just over 500 employers and spread across about 40 countries around the world. And these are 6 things that I thought were really important to pull out. The disconnect I've begun to talk about, and I'll say a little bit more about that in a moment. The second one, go early or miss out. The message here that comes through very clearly is this isn't something that should begin when people are thinking about the move into the C-suite. This is something that needs to begin at a very early stage, at building a pipeline, and almost tempted to say, in terms of messaging, with undergraduate students. That is a starting point about the potential and the opportunity. The third one is the cost of change. Cost is a significant barrier. Yes, we are finding family and other issues and that support internally, but cost is a significant barrier at the moment. The fourth one, you all touched on, a number of you touched on in the word cloud that came out, which is what is the impact of family? Number 5, flexibility. Absolutely, maybe even more so than running separate programs for women. It's the way the programs are delivered that is important. And then a final one, which is almost an impact and after the event, more than alumni networks. And I'll explain a little bit what we mean by that as I go through. But that, for want of a better phrase, after sales service is an incredibly important component of the whole process. Let me say a little bit about, we've got some quotes from individuals, we've got some data to share. So what you have here, this disconnect between promise and practice. A lot of the women we interviewed, we did some interviews as well, absolutely experience sexism day in, day out in the workplace. And sometimes, as this first person suggests, it doesn't necessarily feel like it to begin with. The moment you think about what's being said to you, it's absolutely clear that that is the question. The second one, there are these networks of men, informal networks, as it says, playing football together, going to the golf tournaments and playing golf together, where women are often excluded. Not necessarily on purpose, but historically they've been excluded, and those barriers haven't broken down. So opportunities are missed, conversations don't take place, people don't see what could be contributed if these people were involved. They simply, as this woman says, don't have the access. And to back that up with a little bit of data, we found only 9% of the employees in the survey, as it says, have more than 50% women in senior leadership, despite saying they have these supporting cultures. And I think that this is really at the heart of this disconnect. A lot of employers said, yes, we're doing this, we're doing that, we're doing the other. But it doesn't seem to be translating into impact in terms of women making it into senior roles. And we can debate why that might be, but that is the reality. The women who rejected executive education, who decided not to pursue study because we broke the respondents down into those who completed, those who were considering or currently taking, and those who rejected. Those who rejected, far more likely, twice as likely and more to have received no employer support. And that's not necessarily even financial support. That might simply be time off to study. Flexibility again, as we mentioned a moment ago. And 37% of women who believe their decision not to study has negatively impacted their careers. So we're giving up on over a third of the human potential in our organizations, which just seems to be madness, absolutely madness, when productivity is a problem throughout the Western world. Just to put this into a shape of a few numbers, this disconnect message, you see across the top, 72% more women should fill leadership roles, 71%. More women should fill leadership roles in our organization. 72% more needs to be done to support the advancement of women. And 71%, we recognize that historically women have been discriminated against. But 69%, we already do enough to support women's career advancement. And 80%, our organizational culture effectively and actively supports gender equality in leadership. The two sets of numbers here cannot work, they just don't make sense together. It's almost like people are compartmentalizing their approach. Yes, we're doing these things. The organization has ticked the boxes. We have active policies and we recognize there's a problem. But we as an organization, it's not us, it's the other organizations down the road. And that simply cannot be the case in most cases. So there is this disconnect issue that we found. But the employers are doing something. That's certainly clear. As you can see here, around about half, yes, we have initiatives specifically aimed at women. Yes, we've made a strategic decision to sponsor women specifically for exec ed programs. And you can see the sorts of things that is driving this. Enhancing the performance of high potential women employees, increase diversity in senior leadership, support internal focus on equity or inclusion goals to address leadership pipeline imbalances. We've identified the problem, it's implementing the solution where there seems to be a blockage. What is interesting is none of them are simply saying to grow productivity in our organization, which would seem to be an almost essential component for doing all of these things. It's a reason for training and developing people, whatever sex they are. And what are the barriers that limit investment, employers say? A lack of internal prioritization and leadership support. So it's just not the most important thing. I've got other things to do. We don't have the senior leadership, the C-suite, saying this should be a priority. Then it's a bit of a cop-out. We can't find programs tailored to women's needs. We'll come back to what business schools need to do at the end of the presentation. Is there any budget? Well, that fits in with prioritization. Difficulty freeing up participants' time. They all feel like excuses, because there are ways of addressing all of these issues, we believe, within large organizations, certainly. The second point was this idea of going early or missing out. 77% of employers, more interventions earlier in women's careers will create a larger talent pool for senior positions. So giving people that confidence and that boost and that opportunity at an early stage, rather than waiting to the decision where, oh, we now need to find a new director, who are we going to choose, who's got the skills, who's got the aptitude, who's got the ability. However, a third of employers recognize they also face challenges in building a pipeline of future talent. Well, it doesn't take a genius, surely, to say, well, if that's the case, then why aren't I doing more of that first point and addressing the pipeline earlier to build the skills, to build the individuals, to make sure that the pool of talent is there for the future. So it comes back to the point I made at the very beginning. It's never too early to start. And addressing these issues. I have a 20-year-old daughter on her 21-year-old daughter on her undergraduate degree at the moment. And I do see a little bit of her being given opportunities, but I'm not sure it's enough. I can see in a year's time, when she comes to start looking in the jobs market, there could have been more done. And so, individually, I think, do this, do that. How about this experience? How about this opportunity? All of these things are going to be positive. But of course, people have to study as well. There's only so much time. We're back to the flexibility issue. I want to talk about cost from a number of different perspectives. First of all, this question about childcare costs. Even if I can access childcare, can I afford the childcare to give me the time, to, as it says, to have a bit more freedom? Or do I therefore consequently postpone a decision to study, to advance my skills, until my children are a little bit older and perhaps there's a little bit more flexibility? And then following on from that, this point about mechanisms to measure impact. If employers find it difficult to justify investment, identifying what works, ensuring that executive education is effectively supporting women's career advancement, there's a risk that they'll just not do it. So much today in business is about measurement. So much is about data, being able to say, this is the outcome that we're seeking, and it's happened because we've made this investment. Well, if the data isn't there to support that, it becomes another reason not to do it. And that's a real important point to make. You can see here lots of reasons women say they can't access executive education. But the top four: cost, time, family, workload. And dare I say, three of those are definitely connected: time, family, and workload, cost being the one that stands out. What is interesting, we'll come to it in just a moment, employers think family is much more of an issue and are perhaps using that as a reason not to do some of the things we're talking about. But there's a long list of things here, and that lack of confidence, 1 in 6 almost, saying a lack of confidence. And this again comes back to that early intervention, giving people a sense that they can do it, and that if they do it, the outcomes will be positive for them. And so I think that's incredibly important, but a long list of issues here. And I'm very happy to come back to this later if that's helpful. Cost, in part, as it says here, is also driving a growing interest in short courses. So if it's coming down to me, if the support isn't there from my employer and I'm having to make that contribution to get going, then cost of a program is incredibly important. Yeah, maybe I'll get a career boost, maybe I'll get a pay increase. But programs that are delivered flexibly, that certainly don't involve giving up a job, are incredibly important. And I think this is a significant message for business schools as well. I always hesitate about recommending free programs. And I'm not sure that is necessarily the right way forward. But low-cost entry programs accompanied by good CRM systems that make a pipeline of people who've had a positive experience in an initial program will then lead to more people taking part in programs at a higher price point going forward. So processes aligned with cost are really important. You can see 43% of prospective women learners, this is prospective women learners, not the whole group, cite cost as a barrier to study. And 51% cited as the number one reason for rejecting study. So as I say, I hesitate to suggest the word free, but I think low cost entry points are incredibly important. You can see it again, if the cost of using business school programs was affordable for our organization, employers, again, saying the same sort of thing. It really should be less of a barrier for an employer, but maybe it's still in the mindset. Evidence of the positive impact would make us more likely to involve women in executive education. If I knew more about the program schools offer, if I were required by law, I'm quite glad that that's the fourth reason and not the first reason. Yeah, that should never be the first reason. But if it makes a difference for some organizations, then so be it. And flexible solutions, not necessarily for the women, but as it says, not keeping them away from work where they're clearly valued and important and contributing. And so there's a picture building up here, I think, of the things that are important. What about family? You can't get away from it. It's inevitably a question. As it says here, these are quotes from women, being a mother, having a career, doing executive education. You could do two of those three, but you can't do all three. It isn't a right answer about, there isn't a right answer about which one you pick. Well, it comes back to this flexibility issue. Can you find a way of making it possible to do all three? And then I love this one. Your most important career choice is your choice of partner. When you wake up and the kids are sick, is it a me problem or is it an us problem? Do we both open our calendars and see what we can free up in our day? Or is the assumption, as this from a woman, that I cancel everything and take care of the problem? Well, I'm not suggesting business schools go into the dating business, although I did see recently that Stanford are doing an interesting exercise because apparently highly talented people find it hard to find time to make relationships. And so maybe there is something in terms of that opportunity in the marketplace. At the very least, perhaps it's a message for men in class that when they're hearing these messages, they're thinking, okay, I can see there's something I need to think about there. 24% of prospective women learners say family and caregiving responsibilities are a barrier to learning. 41% of employers have the same views. As I said earlier on, employers seem to be attributing women's lower participation to their personal choices rather than addressable structural barriers. It feels again like an excuse, a reason to not pursue this program, not to pursue this opportunity, not to promote an individual, whereas actually none of those are true. And then the fifth one, a flexible solution. Yes, as it says here, again, quotes, you can do these things completely online to great success. But actually, it's nice to convene people. And consistently, we find in other research that blended forms of study are popular because people do want to have connections with people. And taking a small amount of time out of work, even if it has to be taken as holiday, is doable. And if that makes for a better experience, then that's a really important point. Online education needs to be accessible to women. Don't put the check-ins at 7 o'clock at night when they're with their children, putting them to bed, feeding them, whatever it might be, spending what little time they have with them. It's got to be during the working day when they can make some time at work to do these sorts of things. And then this last one, whether women who are holding down careers can access executive education, it really depends first and foremost on the employer and the employer's ability to give them the time out to do it or to take something off their desk. If the employer is not supportive, they're completely stuffed. And in another quote, somebody said, it's really important that my employer make sure that my team is also able to function without me being there. to have the right systems and processes in place to support that team if I'm going to be away for a day or two, or maybe even a week in some cases. So it's not just one thing, it's a number of things that are important. Employers and individual women both saying flexibility is important. 76% executive education needs flexible options for women. 41% see blended learning as the most effective for overcoming barriers. And maybe it is, but maybe it's important for those other reasons. I said 34% of women considering future study prefer blended formats. And 14%, so 1 in 7, have rejected study because of lack of flexibility of program delivery. They simply cannot make the time to study in the way that's being offered to them. I just thought I'd add this piece in there. We asked individual women what were the important topics that they wanted to study, and there aren't many surprises here, really. Technology skills, communication, business analytics, organizational leadership, inevitably artificial intelligence are the top topics. What is interesting, and I don't have the data to show you, I don't think, is the difference when you ask this question to employers about what they, in their business as a whole, think is important for executive education topics. Top issue is an advanced management program. So it is about building that pipeline. AI, I think, is number 2 at a much higher level than it is here. The employer obsession with AI is very clear. But beyond that, much of what is here is the same. So there is alignment between what women think is important and what employers think is important. That back to some of those points at the beginning, the suggestion that, yes, we know these things need to be done, but we're just not doing them. And then finally, this slide, more than an alumni network. A few quotes here. I happens a lot of women. I was promoted very fast. Salary wasn't keeping pace with my seniority. So I was moving out of the groups of networks that I was comfortable in into another area where they didn't exist. I was looking for exposure to women who've succeeded at a very high level, to connect with other women in my situation, because as you go further up in any organization, there's opportunity to have peers you can speak to. So I have an ambition to network with these more senior people. And if the reality is that 80% of the senior people in the industry are men, you don't need a women's network, you need a network. So it's not just specialist networks for women, it's more than that. And this is particularly true. This was somebody in the technology sector. I think a few slides just to sort of pull all this together. Look, the gains are clear from executive education. Maybe not automatic, not universal. And that follow-up piece tied into this networking piece, whether it's coaching, mentoring, internal sponsorship, if you don't have those, you'll lose a lot of the benefit that was accrued from the initial training and development. So there's clearly room for, as we say here, greater intentionality and investment in this area. That follow-on piece is almost as important as the learning and development itself. Challenge to business schools, we think, is sort of threefold maybe. Threefold: grow awareness, educate, advocate, but also evidence. So this is the idea that schools need to work with employers to demonstrate impact. Really important. They need to encourage more individual employers to engage, and maybe that's the low-cost starting point. They need to be flexible and affordable. So, as we've talked about, the blended options, creating inclusive learning environments, and then building these strong alumni networks. And when I said more than alumni, all of the schools here today will have alumni networks, but it needs to go beyond that. Yes, I'm very happy to be part of an alumni network, but I need something that's for me and my situation. And then advocating for systemic change with employers. We've had organizations pushing these agendas. Do business schools need to invest a little bit more of their time, in particular, perhaps in a research capacity, working with employers, demonstrating the real benefits, the case studies of how certain training has led to certain opportunities, has led to certain advancement for women. And I like this quote. It's almost my final slide. I've got one more to show. But it sort of expresses a lot of the frustration. you know, it says, yes, women come back, they feel more empowered, more confident, more self-insured, a renewed energy to deal with men in more constructive ways and navigate around the barriers. But then there's a chance that they slowly fall back into the day job because nothing really changes around them. So dealing with the individual is great, but if we're not also tackling the system, again, the impact will be diminished over time. And so I think that this is something else that was really interesting that came out in the study. So a few quick recommendations for business schools. I think, first of all, flexible programs that accommodate women, particularly those returning from career breaks, but also pivoting into new roles, and doing so in ways that allow them the opportunity to continue to have family lives. Combining leadership development with future-facing skills, such as it says here, AI, data analytics, and digital transformation. That horrible phrase I said, pimping the experience, allowing people to personalize, if you like. Growing the networking opportunities, and that doesn't just mean peer-to-peer, but it means those who have the ambition for the future with those who are already there. Really important. Career impact data, absolutely. That's going to convince people it's worth spending the money to come on these programs, and tools for organizations to evaluate the impact and benefits of executive education. And then working with organizations to address some of these wider systemic barriers. Design career progression plans for women that explicitly incorporate executive education. I'm going to stop there. I realize that we now only have 12 minutes of official time left, but I'm very happy to continue onwards to discuss any of the points. But I hope that has been a helpful run through of some of the key findings.
Andrew, thank you so much for sharing your key findings with us. We have a couple of questions that we wanted to ask from a UNICON perspective and then open it up to the audience to ask more in the last 12 minutes. We were curious on what surprising insight you the most. Like, what was it that you're like, oh my God, this was not something we expected?
It was an interesting one. I thought about this. Part of it, I suppose, is as a man, what did I not expect? And I thought that family would be a bigger barrier than it was. Interesting. All my prejudices, absolutely. But I think I've grown up I'm 60 now. I've grown up over the last 40 years. And I've seen initiative after initiative after initiative, whether it's a government level, whether it's a corporate level. And my perception was change had been happening. Having a daughter makes you realize how little change has happened and what their barriers are and therefore what needs to be done. So I think that was my biggest surprise. As an organization, I think the surprise was the gap between employer rhetoric and employer action.
Thank you for that. That's really interesting. And hopefully, if there are fathers on this call, you can support your daughters and figuring out how to remove those barriers. There is something in the chat, so let's just see. From Karine, do you want to get off chat to ask your specific question, or is that just a comment?
Well, maybe just checking my understanding of one for me, the key conclusion is that in the end, it's the format that matters to make this executive education experience or learning accessible to women more than the content and the topics that would be put on the programs.
I think that comment about blended being the most attractive format for learning compared to content, inevitably there's this enormous long tail of content and people will want different things in different places. So I'll always be able to find the content somewhere, and if it's delivered in a format that works for me, then that's great. So in that sense, being provided in the right format is more important than the content.
Corinne, did that help answer your understanding?
Sure, I think it also validates, I mean, my perception and experience as, it doesn't make much sense to necessarily look for content. And sometimes, especially in some organizations that may not understand that the format is more important than the content, they would still come to us and asking for, okay, develop content that would be specific for women. And then I always reflect, okay, but strategy is strategy. I cannot make strategy now become a female thing. So, I mean, we can, of course, also help female leaders to talk about strategy and speak up and all that, but it's not the content itself. And I think it is also the maturity of the organizations we work with that is important, because they might come to us with an expectation that they're looking for content specific to women, whereas in the end, that's not the solution that they need.
And just something else to add on that. I was at a presentation before Christmas, director of a exec head in a UK business school, and stood on the platform and said, today, nobody pays for content. I thought that was a really interesting observation. They're paying for experience, they're paying for outcome, they're paying for network, they're paying for after sales service, as I suggested. There are so many of us, and as I showed on that early slide, so many providers of content that they can get it almost anywhere. Some will feel they can get it free of charge online. I don't think that's a very good experience necessarily, but that idea, I think, is a really important one to grab hold of.
100%. There's so much content available these days for free. So really good point, Andrew. Natalie, would you like to ask your question?
Sure. Hi, so I just put it in the chat. Yeah, I have clients that are increasingly worried as being labeled as they need remedial work as a woman, and therefore at a company level they're hesitating on doing women's programs or sending women. So just wondering what you think about that and how we could reframe that.
Yeah, it's a terrible idea, remedial.
Yeah, I'm just using their words, right? It's
absolutely.
it's not what I think of it, but
no,
just,
not at all. Not at all. I think it comes back to this point in the presentation about starting young. If there is a gap, then it's because work wasn't done at a younger age. But what I would always hope is that there is an opportunities for a continuum, a linear continuum, where you have introduction to programs, then you have middle programs, and you have advanced programs. And so if you move people through that line, there should be no reason for remedial when they get to a middle or senior role. There's always an opportunity to learn new, partly because the world around us is changing so rapidly nowadays. But that's not remedial. It's about recognizing the rapidity of change. So I think, I'm sure there's a better way of rephrasing it. Certainly, it should be about preparing for the future. That's where it should be.
Thank you.
Natalie, any follow-up or you're good?
Yes, it's not even that they need it necessarily. It's they don't want to call it a women's program because then it's identified as being remedial. And so
and this is
I don't know what we do with that exactly. But yeah.
No, well, it's an interesting question itself, and it came up several times. Should schools offer programs just for women?
Exactly.
Or should they say, no, come on? And my answer is they should offer both. I don't think it's easy. You can't say just one or the other. You had that come up from the woman in the tech sector who is in an environment where 80% of the senior leaders may be male. And she needs both. She needs programs where she can stand confidently with the men who are leading those organizations, but also probably needs to be part of a small network of senior women leaders in that industry. And I think the same is true of programs, really.
Yeah. Thank you, Andrew. We have one final question from the audience. Rania, would you like to share your question?
Thanks, Shalini. Actually, it was a question that I am taking away from today. Thank you so much, Andrew, for sharing this presentation. And it's really helping us reframe and shift our mindset, because our focus is always on content. But what other things we can do in designing learning experiences that would put women, as you said, in a network, not beyond an alumni network, because we're not just teaching them to navigate the current power structures in their organization, but how can we put them in front of people who, are going to help them, get to that career advancement that they're looking for. So this is more of a question for us. How do we design, not beyond the content and beyond the network, experiences that would support women's growth and careers? Thank you so much for the insightful presentation again.
No, my pleasure. And I agree entirely with your comment here, finding that way to design for the future and also keeping evolving things. Yes, we can today design something that's right for tomorrow, but in a year's time, given the pace of change, what are we doing to make sure the program is still current? I went to a presentation in Australia 18 months ago, and this was a senior person in university leadership talking about their degree programs. And they were delighted that they'd managed to get their review cycle down to a 7-year review cycle. And yeah, I sort of sat there and thought, well, if it was 7 months, I'd be excited about that. And that's sort of mindset I think we need to have.
Excellent, Andrew. And thank you so much for your time today. Really appreciate everything that you shared with us and our continued relationship from a UNICON standpoint. We hope you all took away some great insights. As Daniele pointed out, we have another webinar taking place soon. So please definitely sign up. It's on our research paper on executive education, the age of lifelong learning coming up. And so we look forward to seeing you at that next webinar in a few weeks. Have a great day, everyone, whatever time zone you're in. Take care.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Everyone.